Joining us now is FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Good to be with you, Holly.
Your agency, the FDA, is teaming up with the DOJ when it comes to e-cigarettes. You found illegal e-cigarettes coming into this country. So talk about what you found and where they're coming from.
So a lot of the e-cigarettes sold or vaping devices sold are illegal Chinese vaping devices. Sometimes they have cutesy, fruity flavors. None of those are FDA approved. Some of them have video games or Bluetooth-enabled listening devices for music connected to the actual device that you vape from. It's designed to get kids addictive, and many kids are addicted. We have a high number of kids who are using vaping products, illegal vaping products, not switching from combustible cigarettes to FDA-approved vaping products, but instead using these other illegal Chinese vaping products from scratch.
And so talk about the dangers, if you would, about children and young people using e-cigarettes or vaping, because we were first told, oh, this is a safer alternative to cigarettes, but it's not so for young people.
Well, the safer alternative to cigarettes are FDA-approved devices, and those are on the market, and there's a list of those on our website, and the retailer should know which ones are FDA-approved. But when you see all of these illegal Chinese products, and it's pretty obvious which ones are the illegal Chinese products. Sometimes it's the majority of vaping products in a vape store. We don't know what's in them. We don't know the levels of formaldehyde, what other chemicals are in those products. And so we hear stories of a child from a high school going to a hospital once a month. Some kid from a high school may go to a hospital to get checked out for what they call popcorn lung, which is a reactive phenomena. So research is just starting in this area, but when you have high numbers of teens starting on these illegal Chinese devices from scratch, that's something we have to educate people about.
Is vaping dangerous for young people? I mean, we know that they're still developing, their brains are still developing. Talk about the effects on these e-cigarettes and vaping in general, even the legal ones.
So up to a third of these illegal devices sometimes are delivering THC, one of the ingredients in marijuana. And marijuana for a young developing teen is very different from marijuana of the hippies, where it has a different effect in the developing mind. Marijuana today is 10 to 20 times more potent than marijuana of the hippies years ago. And so it's almost designed differently, and we know that 25% of kids that use marijuana regularly, that what we call a cannabinoid use disorder, go on to have a diagnosis of psychoses later in life. So it is having some different effect in a young person than an adult.
Okay, and if I could switch a little bit too, because we have you here, I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Right now, we know that in the news, acetaminophen pregnancy use, it's causing a lot of confusion to people. So tell us, where does the FDA stand? Where does the HHS, the administration, stand when it comes to acetaminophen use and pregnancy? There seems to be a lot of people who don't know what to do now.
So autism is an epidemic in the United States that was rare just a generation ago. We've had a charge to tackle this problem, and in doing the research, we found some things that we thought that we should make it available to the public now. The number one thing was that we found for some kids, autism is an autoimmune disease whereby their body is reacting to the folate receptor on the brain, blocking the brain from getting this critical vitamin. And there's a treatment called leucovorin that some kids take and have marked improvement in their autistic symptoms. That's a big headline. That's a good news story. Another piece that we found is that there's a group of studies that are somewhat conflicting, but 27 studies in a recent Harvard Mount Sinai review found an association between prenatal acetaminophen use and autism later. There were about 14 studies to the contrary. It was mixed, so the FDA sent out a letter to doctors letting them know there is a controversy in the field. There's two different views on this. Consider this when prescribing acetaminophen, because most low-grade fevers do not need to be treated anyway. And so when we made the announcement, we said there are exceptions and talk to your doctor. But the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health believes that there is a causal association between prenatal acetaminophen use and downstream autism. It may have a small effect on the population. In other words, it's not the leading cause or driver, but when the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health has a major safety concern like that, we felt obligated to make the public aware that there is this discussion in the medical community.
But you mentioned causal versus association. So what is he basing that opinion on, causal? Have there been any studies that show cause between acetaminophen and autism?
I think it's very difficult to show a causal effect. What we describe in the literature is an association. And while that association was there in 27 different studies, he personally believes and has gone on record as the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health that it is a causal relationship. It's a causal association. So you'll have to ask him, but when we have enough smart doctors out there waving a flag in the air that there is a concern here, we simply want to make the public aware of their view.
Although after that, though, there were reports that he had accepted money to be a witness on trials against the makers of Tylenol, acetaminophen. So is that a conflict of interest? Is there a concern there, including him in this information now, making decisions going forward with the FDA?
Almost every physician in academic leadership has taken money to do some consulting or testify in cases as experts. So I'm not sure that distinguishes him in any way from all the other faculty at Harvard University, but people will have to make their own decision. We wanted to make it clear that we're not telling you exactly what you need to do in every situation in pregnancy. We're just saying that this concern is out there and that Tylenol is not even necessary for low-grade fevers, and so people should think twice. Take, for example, a child that has a fever. If a child has a low-grade fever, and you feel like I have to give them Tylenol or ibuprofen, there are studies showing that it actually prolongs the duration of illness. And it may be because the fever is a body's natural way of ridding an infection. That study comes out of Johns Hopkins that treating a fever actually can prolong a child's illness. These are things that people should just consider when talking to your doctor. Make their own decisions.
Do you think studies need to be done looking at the cause of that pain or the fever, and that perhaps the acetaminophen just happens to be a factor in there because when people have pain, when these pregnant women have pain, they take a pain reliever. So it's not really the pain reliever, but the underlying cause of that pain, which could be genetic, because we know there are connections to genetic factors, pre-existing condition to autism.
Yeah, look, these are all factors that are taken into consideration. There have been genetic studies that have done. I don't believe autism is genetic. When you see the severe autism that we see at the high rate that we see today, the repeated motions, the tics, the individuals who are completely nonverbal, you didn't see that a generation ago. You still don't see people in their 60s and 70s with those symptoms, the sort of repetitive motions, the completely nonverbal individuals. This is a modern day phenomena, which tells me it's not genetic. There's something going on there. And so we think the autoimmune process in the child's body may be one of the causes of autism. And so some doctors will take a kid with severe autism and test them for the antibodies to the folate receptor. And then some will then go on, if they have the antibodies, to treat them with leucovorin, which the FDA is about to make available for those kids.
Is it for all kids, the leucovorin for all kids with autism, or CFD?
It's really up to an individual doctor, but most doctors believe the benefit is in kids who have the antibody, and that's about half of kids with autism.
Let me ask you a question. You had said that you're not making a recommendation, talk to your doctor, but President Trump put out on social media today, and I want to read you what he said. He said, pregnant women don't use Tylenol unless absolutely necessary. Don't give Tylenol to your young child for virtually any reason. Then he goes on to say, break up the MMR shot into 3 totally separate shots, not mixed. Take the chickenpox shot separately. Take hepatitis B shot at 12 years old or older, and importantly, take vaccine in 5 separate medical visits. Is this the official recommendations now from the HHS and FDA?
There are a lot of people that are saying the co-administration of vaccines at once may have safety concerns, and so some people want to spread them out. We have parents that say, I'm going to space out the vaccines a little bit. You know, if you go to Denmark, the kids get about a third of the shots as in the US schedule. You go to Germany, it's about the same as well. So we have to be willing to ask questions and listen to parents when they say, does my kid really need a hepatitis B shot at birth? Our view is no. That's the Secretary's view, it's my view, it's the President's view. You don't need the hepatitis shot on the day of birth unless the mom is Hep B positive. And I think you saw in that statement from the President that there are exceptions unless absolutely necessary and in certain circumstances. We have a pill-popping culture. And the idea that you have to treat a low-grade fever in a child because it's going to help them is not true. It actually can prolong the duration of the illness.
But does it concern you that the president is giving medical advice as a very well-respected medical doctor?
We need to have more dialogue like this. We just came out of an administration where anyone who had a different opinion from Tony Fauci was censored and sidelined and not included in mainstream debate. We had political apartheid in science where you were completely silenced if you believed, as I did, that the schools should have been open in the fall of 2020, or that a 2-year-old toddler did not need to wear a cloth mask for 3 years, or that a teenager didn't need 7 COVID booster shots. Those were reasonable scientific opinions. The data has caught up and shown that we were correct, but you had this sort of mindset that we're not allowed to talk openly. Now you're seeing people talk very openly about their ideas, and I'm always going to speak as a physician on what I think is best for patients.
And talking about the vaccine and the vaccine schedule, I mean, this is something, though, that has been based on scientific clinical studies for many decades. So why now is it being changed? Why now a different opinion? Because there are no clinical science studies that show anything different.
Well, I think, the idea that, well, this is science and that's anti-science is the era we just came out of. Show me any scientific study that the hepatitis B shot given at birth is better than the hepatitis shot given at age 10 or 12. Doesn't exist. Matter of fact, there were no long-term studies on hepatitis B. Go look at the FDA label. It'll tell you it was based on a 5-day follow-up period. That was the safety evaluation that was used. So, look, I'm not saying it's not safe. I'm saying the idea that somehow the modern vaccine schedule that the U.S. has developed was written by Moses on Mount Sinai, and we have to just say, this is science. We have to be able to ask questions, and that's the scientific process. And I think a reasonable first question is, do we really need the hepatitis B shot at birth and a Hep B negative mother? I think the answer is no. You can do it later.
Will you do more studies? Will the administration fund more studies then to show what you're saying actually follows the science?
Look, we're going to do more studies, but we can also use common sense. Look at a country like Denmark where they give a third the shots that we give in the United States. Do you see mass outbreaks of measles or diphtheria or any of these other? No, you don't. You don't see a difference in massive outbreaks. You don't see any difference in outbreaks. So we can, for example, in the case of the COVID booster shot in young, healthy individuals, we can use common sense to say, we can't keep going down this road of giving you a little transient protection for 3 months with the COVID shot, and then your risk goes back to baseline, and it's inevitable. The COVID virus is like the common cold. So if we're going to bring people in every 3 months for a little added protection with an antibody high, then it just doesn't make sense, because we do know the COVID booster has been associated with myocarditis in 1 in 2,600 young males. So everything in medicine needs to be a risk-benefit ratio. And when you look at the total cumulative burden of aluminum, for example, in a child's body, it's very different if you use, say, one of the European schedules versus the US schedule. I think we need to be flexible with parents who are coming in saying, hey, I want to use the Japanese schedule or the UK schedule or the French schedule. In France, you have to be 80 to get the COVID booster shot or have a risk factor. In the UK, it's age 75.
You mentioned the COVID vaccine. Isn't that what we do with the flu vaccine? We get a new one every year, a booster every year, because as we know, it mutates, and that's what's happening with COVID. So why would COVID be different than the flu vaccine?
Because the COVID shots only had one clinical trial, and it had very mixed results in young, healthy individuals, and it didn't even account for natural immunity, which is now prevalent in the United States. The flu shot has had 81 clinical studies. It's tried and true. It's been around for 50 years, and it doesn't mutate as fast as COVID. COVID virus mutates 31 times faster. So it's a very different regulatory framework.
And speaking of the COVID vaccine, mRNA, right now we're not funding mRNA research, but as you know, mRNA vaccine treatments rather for cancer, for chronic disease has been very successful and scientifically proven. So do you as a doctor think mRNA is not effective and is actually dangerous? We should not be using it for COVID?
I'd like to see more mRNA research. My view, though, is that the companies made $100 billion off their mRNA technology during COVID. They can afford to do their own studies. Why were we spending $500 million of taxpayer dollars to fund the research and development of big pharma? I'd rather see pharma pay for their own R&D, and instead we can fund new treatments on the cutting edge for rare neurodegenerative diseases where there otherwise would not be funding. We're funding a universal flu shot, which would give long-term protection against the flu instead of coming in every year where we guess what the strain is. So I believe in mRNA technology, but the companies can fund that R&D themselves, and they will.
So when they do, if they do decide to fund it and say, look, here's our clinical studies, it's safe, then will you say, okay, we endorse the mRNA vaccine for COVID?
Yeah, that's our process. Our process as an FDA is to receive the data from a pharmaceutical company that they present from a study and determine whether or not the claims they want to make around a product like a vaccine matches the data that they've submitted to us. And if it matches, then yes, we will approve. We approved 3 COVID shots this year for high-risk individuals, 2 mRNA vaccines and 1 traditional vaccine with the Novavax platform. But we're not going to keep going every year where we rubber stamp a new vaccine that creates a new protein in the body without any clinical data. That's the era we just came out of, where every year the FDA was blindly rubber stamping a new COVID vaccine that creates a new protein in the body. We've told the companies it's been 5 years since a clinical trial. This is a reasonable time to check in with another clinical trial because it was a theory that taking it every year would be helpful. We honestly don't know if it would be helpful to take it every year in healthy subjects, and 85% of healthcare workers said no to the COVID booster last year. What does that tell you?
So if you don't know, though, is it safe to take it away from people, or would you say, look, let's let this stay on the market now until we prove that this is not good for us? Because we do know, though, during the pandemic, it saved millions of lives.
Well, first of all, it is on the market. People can get it. Anyone who wants a COVID shot can get a COVID shot. They can get it on one of the FDA-approved indications or off-label. It's available everywhere. Some stage you may need a physician prescription. But the idea that everyone should get it every year, that a 6-year-old healthy girl needs another 70 mRNA COVID shots in her lifespan, is a theory that is unproven. And so we just think it's a reasonable time to check in with another clinical trial. The idea that every healthy person needs a COVID shot every year in perpetuity is a philosophy in the United States that exists mostly in the media, but we are international outliers. The entire rest of the world has gone to a risk stratified approach where it's only recommended for high-risk individuals, like in the UK, where they only recommend it for people over 75 or those with this major risk factor.
What about, you talk about funding clinical studies, and I know that the government has cut a lot of funding this year. The Trump administration has cut much of medical research, and I know that even your hospital, former hospital, Johns Hopkins, sent an email to employees preparing them for layoffs, for cuts in research funding, medical research funding. So what do you tell your former coworkers, your former colleagues about these funding cuts, and how is that going to affect doing any kind of research going forward that's desperately needed?
So I'm glad you asked that, because this is a false narrative. Not $1 in NIH research grants have been cut in the Trump administration. Now, 14% of NIH grants were going to DEI research studies. They should be going to cancer and heart disease and rare diseases in children. And so those grants were pivoted to other root cause studies. We want to get at the root cause of ADHD and autism and other things. So We did have research grants on DEI pivoted, but the NIH budget today is bigger than the NIH budget last year. And despite all the false narratives that NIH funding was cut, it's simply not true. Same with Medicaid. Not a dollar of Medicaid has been cut. The budget next year has more money for Medicaid than for last year. So I'm glad you asked this, because there are a lot of false narratives out there and not a lot of opportunities for us to clarify.
What about 2027, 2028? Because we know things sort of stay the same throughout next year, but what happens beyond that? And why then did Johns Hopkins prepare your colleagues, your former colleagues, for layoffs and cuts in research spending?
Probably because they're watching the mainstream media, which is saying NIH dollars are getting cut. So there's a lot of fear-mongering going on out there. Not a dollar of NIH research funds have been cut. Their budget is the same. Some grants were pivoted from DEI to other root causes where we have to get at the problems causing 40% of our nation's kids to be sad with a chronic disease. That is a crisis, and it's been off the radar of the NIH. The NIH, when we came into office, was a mess. They were funding a lab in Wuhan, China, brewing up a virus that killed 20 million people. They had all kinds of research on DEI, not even reducing disparities in minority communities, just describing the differences. In my opinion, we don't need to be describing the differences, we need to be bridging those differences. So we do a lot of things in academic medicine to make ourselves feel like we're doing a good job and helping others, but we really have to start getting towards a cure for type 1 diabetes, for Alzheimer's, for Lyme disease. Lyme disease has a crazy history, if you read the book Bitten, with one of the government labs being proximate to the origins of Lyme disease. We want to see a universal flu shot, and I want to see a treatment for stage 1 and stage 2 cancers and other cancers where we now see some really promising treatments in the pipeline. And that's the cool thing about working at the FDA, is you get to see some really exciting treatments. And finally, Holly, one of my big priorities is to see a promising treatment for people with PTSD. We lose 8,000 veterans a year to suicide. That's more than we lost the entire Iraq and Afghan wars, the entire spans of those wars. So the wars are over, but our men and women are still dying. We owe it to them to get a decision out quickly on these potentially promising treatments for PTSD.
I wish we had 3 hours to speak. I know that you have limited time, but I appreciate you taking the time here. I please hope you come back so we can talk further, and I look forward to the day when you come back here and say, we've got great treatments for cancer, diabetes.
Hopefully soon.
Let's mark it down.
Hopefully soon.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks so much, Holly.